Hello, I'm Martin Wilsh, your host, and I've got a great guest this evening, Robert Wittman. He was a founder of the Art Crime Investigation Team. He's going to correct me exactly uh, how that goes, and he's been at it ever since. This was back in many years ago. He was traveling all over the world undercover. He's got great stories, and I have a lot of questions for him. I'm pretty excited to talk to him. He was on the show over 12 and a half years ago, something like that. And a lot's happened since then. So, all right. Great to see you, Robert.
Hey, Martin, how are you?
Good. We've been kind of in touch ever since last time, here and there. And, you know, but a lot has happened since you were on the show. But I'd like for you, if you would, to tell the listening audience, your background. And you were involved in art recovery all around the world. You did all these amazing things, have a lot of great stories, and a very successful book that was on the top. Wasn't it on the bestsellers list for a while?
Well, it was just named this week by the Wall Street Journal as the third best art crime book ever. So
right.
I was happy to see that. Yeah, it's called Priceless.
Excellent.
How I Went Undercover to Rescue the World's Stolen Treasures.
Yeah. And you did. You went everywhere. And, these are really amazing sting operations. But before we get started into all that, how did that form in the beginning? And was it kind of your brainchild, or did someone approach you about it?
Well, no, what happened was I went in the FBI. I started in 1988. And the thing that got me interested was I was watching this TV show, and I really liked it, called Miami Vice. Some of you might remember that show.
Oh, yeah.
And quite honestly, I wanted to be Crockett. I wanted to be the guy, on the cigarette boat in Miami Harbor with the white suit, and the Lamborghini or whatever. Yeah, I thought that'd be really cool with the cool music, So I applied to the FBI, and I got in, and I put down for my top 3 offices. I was coming out of Baltimore. I said Baltimore, Honolulu, and Miami. And they sent me to Philadelphia. So you serve at the needs of the Bureau. That's the way they put it. And I guess they needed me in Philly. So what happened was I got assigned right off the bat to what we called the truck hijacking squad. That was a squad in the office that did interstate investigations of theft. And there was a real problem at the time of truck give-ups, load give-ups between New York and Miami. And a lot of them were being given up because that was during the crack days, when the drivers would get hooked on crack and then give up their loads in order to get more drugs. Oh. So that was happening quite often. And we had a whole squad in Philadelphia that was investigating that and property crime in general. And it just so happened, Martin, that the first 2 cases that I was assigned when I got to the FBI in Philadelphia were 2 museum heists. One from the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, and the other from the renowned August. I'm thinking Renoir, but it's not. It's I can't. It just went on my head. Yeah, it was a man with the broken nose was a sculpture that was stolen, and it was done by Rodin. August Rodin. And so these pieces were stolen. I was given those investigations, and I investigated it, and actually was able to recover those artworks and lock some people up. So then the FBI, in their infinite wisdom, decided I would be that guy and do those investigations.
Yeah. Well, it helps that you have a background. I remember you telling me that you grew up, your dad had an Asian arts antique business.
Yeah, my father was in Japan during the Korean War, and he fell in love with Japanese antiques. And when he came back to the States after 7 years of being in Japan, he brought back a Japanese wife and two sons. And as a result, he decided he wanted to get into the antiques business, and he specialized in Asian antiques. He opened a store in Baltimore called Wittman's Oriental Gallery. Of course, that's not politically safe to say anymore. So today, I guess it would be Wittman's Asian Gallery. But he specialized in selling Japanese.
They still use the term Oriental rugs.
True.
I do hear that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, I mean, that's a very difficult study, or it can be, when it gets into other Asian arts, Korean and Chinese and stuff like that. And my dad used to have a saying that the Chinese have been faking antique porcelain for thousands of years. That's what he'd say. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't necessarily fake them, but they would just keep going back to a period that was popular and, redo the style, that type of
Oh,
thing.
sure. Well, families, even, families can create the porcelain because it comes from the same ground, is made with the same materials, and many times in the same ways, just like in the American Southwest. The Pueblo tribes, they make ceramics today the way they made them 100 years ago. In the kilns, creating that, and it's made with the same soil, so it's hard to determine how old something is even today. So and it's not because they're faking it. I think it's because that's the tradition. And that's handed down from father to son to daughter and mother to daughter, and that's how they make it.
Yeah, I love some of the Pueblo pottery that you mentioned. Some of the black on black, Maria, and there's some great Native American potters, or were, still are.
Yep. Maria Martinez and Santana.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Great stuff.
Maria, I love her work. Yeah. So as far as the material, what does it encompass when you want to say like art crime? Does that actually? I know that you mentioned before that it actually includes like antiques and things like that, but would that also cover jewelry and jewels and precious metals and things like that? How wide ranging is art theft?
Well, when we talk about art crime, you have to talk about the art business world. And just from an overall standpoint, the art business is a $200 billion business every year. That's how much gets bought and sold around the world, 200 billion.
Wow.
And about 40% of that is in the United States, $80 billion. That's what our market is. We were asked back around the early 2000s by the New York Times to come up with, the FBI was asked to come up with an estimate of what the actual art crime market is. And we after doing a study with the Carbonieri in Italy and also the OCBC, which is the French art theft group, and also the Scotland Yard's Art and Antique Squad, we came up with a figure of about $6 billion a year to be the organized art crime market around the world. Now, I got to tell you today, probably 75% of that is not theft. It's frauds, forgeries, and fakes.
Oh, yes.
Whereas about 25%, maybe 1.5 to 2 billion could be theft. And the other thing you have to understand, Martin, is when the FBI and myself, all of us, when we talk about art crime, it's really cultural property crime. That's what we're referring to. And that includes everything. It's not just sculptures, prints, and paintings. It's also things like comic books, like baseball cards, antique cars, Rolex watches. All of these types of collectibles, luxury materials are all part of the, cultural property market.
Right. And when something becomes valuable, it gets faked. I was at a lecture of this artist. His paintings were selling pretty well. And there was a Q&A after his lecture. And I said, has anyone ever faked your work that you know of? And he just started laughing. He thought that was the most ridiculous thing. But he did have one of those styles that would be very easy to fake. So that's what I'm going to do. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, he did have one of those styles. Yeah. And, demands pretty good money for his thing. So, yeah. And I find that whatever gets valuable gets faked.
Whatever gets valuable gets faked and also gets stolen. Here's how you have to look at it. Criminals are out there and they're watching the news and reading the newspaper, and they see these sales and they see a Picasso sell for 150 million. And they think to themselves, well, it wouldn't be that difficult to go steal one. And even if you can only get 1%, that's 1.5 million, for something you have no money in. And that's a nice profit. So most of the time, what we've seen is that individuals who are criminals are better criminals than businessmen. They can go out and do the job. They can go out and steal the artwork, steal the piece. But then it comes up to be a problem of what do you do with it once you have it? And that's where the real art in an art heist, it isn't the stealing, it's the selling.
I would have looked this up if I had thought about it, but it just came to mind. There was I think it might have been a series on Netflix or something, and it was involved in a woman that was selling art at her New York gallery, and it was all being produced by a former art, professor or something in his garage. And he was making, George Braque and all these major artists' paintings. And he had, like, if something was missing, he would make the size and what it would sound like. I'm talking about the catalog raisonné, where they wouldn't know exactly where the piece is. Then he would make that mysterious thing. I mean, it was very, very involved.
Yeah.
And
That was the Knoedler Gallery case. What
okay,
happened there was that there was the gallery, of course, in New York City, been open for 100 years. One of the real main battleship galleries, in New York, had represented artists for since the 1920s, and had some big name artists that they represented. They started buying some pieces from a gallery owner in Lower Manhattan, who had come into them and said that she had a client who was a collector of ABEX art, abstract expressionist art, from the 1950s. She said that this client was Mexican by heritage, but lived in Switzerland, and would come to New York in the 50s and 60s and buy art directly from the artist studios. And that he had kept this material in vaults in Switzerland all these years, had passed away, and now his son was going to be selling this art out of the vaults. And it was things like Jackson Pollock's, Mark Rothko,
so it wasn't George Brock.
No, it was ABEX
on
art.
That one. Yeah.
And so she started selling. She convinced the gallery that these pieces were legitimate. The gallery did the due diligence. They did study the pieces. They looked into the provenance. They took the pieces to the experts. With the Mark Rothko piece, they actually took it to his framer, who is still alive. And she looked at it and said, "Yeah, the frame's correct. Everything about it's correct." They took it to the National Gallery. And right now, the National Gallery has two researchers that are doing a new catalog raisonné of Mark Rothko's artwork. And they told the gallery that they were going to include these in the catalog raisonné as the real Rothkos. So the gallery did its due diligence. Come to pass, though, it turned out that the artworks were being created by a Chinese artist in Brooklyn. And actually, he was indicted, and he fled to China. The gallerist from Lower Manhattan, she was indicted. She actually served a year in prison. And her co-conspirators who live in Spain have also been indicted, but they haven't been extradited at this point. I was the expert. I gave the expert testimony in that case for the fraud civil lawsuits. And I was the gallery's witness, actually, explaining why it wasn't fraud on the gallery's part, because they did their due diligence and they believed that these pieces were real when they sold them. And about $65 million worth of artwork. So since I left the bureau, that's a lot of the things I do now. I do a lot of expert witness testimony for fraud, and either way. I mean, whether it's real, it depends on the situation. If it's a fraud, I say it, and if it's not, I say, well, they didn't know, so it wasn't. So it depends on the facts of the case. But I had to read about 15,000 pages of deposition for that case.
Oh my God. Wow. Now, we talked just briefly before we went live here, and we're talking about certain things that are selling, like the crazy comic book prices, and also the baseball cards that have just been selling like for these astronomical prices. And do you have an idea why that is? I mean, we're talking millions of dollars for a single baseball card.
I think that there's two parts to that. First is that there's individuals, there's groups of people who are, who have grown up. Maybe the baby boomers is what it is, because that baseball card that sold for $12 million was a Mickey Mantle rookie card. So someone who remembers Mickey Mantle, from the 50s and 60s would have been the one who wanted that. So it's like baby boomers possibly who have done well in life and want to relive their childhoods and their times in the past. And I think that that's part of it. It's a nostalgia type of thing. And so that's it. But then that doesn't explain how, a Tom Brady rookie card sold for $2.2 million. I mean, that was from the year 2000. So that's 20 years old. I mean, why would somebody pay $2.5 million for a Tom Brady rookie card? It was signed, that's
well,
nice.
Here's the thing about, this is what I would imagine would happen. People are going to get wind of that, and they're going to start looking in their collections. And then you're going to get, I've seen this happen many times over the years. Like, you think it's like pretty rare, and then next thing you know, there's like 4 more in the next auction, that type of thing.
Yeah,
prices drop. There has been
the Mickey Mantle cards. It's all based on the condition of the card.
Right.
That one that sold for $12 million was looked at, and it was given a 9 rating out of 10. Recently, another one sold, had like a 5 rating. It sold for $3 million. But even as such, I mean, you're talking about a little piece of cardboard, with Mickey Mantle's picture on it. And these weren't signed, and millions of dollars. I would tell your viewers, if you have a baseball card collection that your parents had or that you have up in the attic, go take a look, see what you got.
Yeah.
Because and you might want to get it insured, because the criminals know this, they see it. Stealing a baseball card collection isn't a federal offense. The FBI may not get involved in that, and you might just
unless
have to
you go interstate. Yeah.
Well, you call the local PD, and they're going to come out and say, "What was stolen? Your baseball cards." It's not going to be considered as as serious a situation. So you might want to get those insured and make sure you have them secured.
I've seen my friends had a Mickey Mantle baseball card, but I don't think it was a rookie, but still they weren't rare. When I was a kid.
Now he played for 15 years or whatever, the card every year. So just happened.
Yeah. I do want to get into some of the more sophisticated things that you've done, undercover basically, but I just have to touch on a couple of things here. And I'm going to make a statement. I want to hear what you say about it, because I do believe it is a true statement. Back in 1911, the Mona Lisa was stolen from a Louvre employee with some help of a couple of others. And that's really the reason we know about the Mona Lisa today and why it became the world's most famous painting. Do you think that's an accurate statement?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was involved in a documentary movie about that case that was created. And absolutely. I mean, the publicity about that when it happened was the first time that something like that actually captured the imagination of the world. I mean, there was articles in the New York Times and in all the different newspapers around the world, pictures of the painting itself. And if it hadn't been for that, it would just be a small Da Vinci in the Louvre. But as a result of that theft, it became the most famous, well-known painting in the world.
And then there was did you happen, I don't even have to ask you this question. I know you're going to say yes. Did you happen to watch the documentary called The Lost Leonardo?
I was in it.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Yeah. What a crazy movie that is. And that has to do with the Salvador Mundi. Let's see. I have a picture of it in the before and after of that painting, because it was majorly restored. I don't know exactly what the percentage of the painting is original to it, but there's for those of you watching this on YouTube, here's the before and after. I did speak with the restorer on that. I was trying to get her on the show. Very nice lady, but she just was too busy. But that story is just so wild.
Yeah,
I mean, it was bought at auction for like, did I get $15,000 originally?
The original first sale.
And then but that movie made me see the side of the art world I had no clue about, the vaults and the things held, in a tax-free environment, and all this art that's stowed away that's amazing that nobody's ever going to get to look at. That's basically kind of a shame.
Well, they're trying to avoid taxes. So they store them in tax-free havens like Singapore. Used to be Switzerland, but Singapore, even Delaware, state of Delaware, doesn't tax material coming into the state, so they put them in storage there too. And they're investment pieces. They're not for enjoyment, of collectors. They're basically investment pieces. There's a lot of art that's investment pieces.
Yeah, and I mean, isn't it kind of a tricky, in my opinion? I guess if you have like a really big name, it's solid, but I always consider that investing in art can be a tricky thing because of fads. I'm talking about more contemporary art. Things can change all the time when it comes to that. But there are household names, that are just solid or have proved to be so far, right?
I recently had a case I just finished in January. It was in trial in New York, and where I was the expert witness in this case. It was involving a Russian collector who had bought, in fact, he had bought the Salvador Mundi, the Da Vinci, and he was the one who sold
that guy. I know
in
that guy
for
who he
400
is.
million.
Yeah.
Yeah, in when the what was it, the Shah or the Sheikh bought it for 400, he was the seller, and he had paid, I think, 130 million for it. And
And he
so,
was threatening the guy he bought it from. Wasn't he threatening him? Like
well, it
there was
wasn't
a,
threatening. It was I guess he bought it through Sotheby's, and Sotheby's offered it to him they were offering it for sale for about 70 million, and his art advisor told him it was 130. And
oh, that's what it was. That's right.
yeah,
And
and
so
so
he had
basically,
nothing to do with him after that. That's right. Yeah.
well, he spent about I think almost $2 billion on art. Picasso, Modigliani. I mean, all the biggest names you could think of.
Yeah.
And basically, he was supposed to have paid about 800 million, but he got hoodwinked for the 1.2, and that was what the lawsuits were about. He was suing Sotheby's as a co-conspirator with his gallery, his gallery guy who was from Switzerland, who supposedly was basically cheating him. But Sotheby's was
Right.
Was acquitted, and the oligarch walked away with basically nothing. But that's how it goes, That's the art industry.
Well, I know the character of I knew someone that was Russian for quite a while, and I know the character. They don't let go easily if they feel they're wronged. In general, so I'm surprised that he walked away. I mean, he actually made the 400 million though, right?
Oh
So
yeah,
he really
yeah.
doesn't have a lot to complain about when it
He's got
comes
the
to
art
that.
too. He's still got the art. I mean, he can sell the
Still
art
has
as
the art.
well. So
Yeah.
he'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Here's a question that came from Chad here. Can you share one of your most memorable or challenging cases from your time with the FBI?
Sure. There were a lot of different cases. I mean, if you pick up a copy of Priceless, that was my memoir that I wrote back in 2010, and I think there were probably 14 cases in there that we did. When you say the most memorable, I mean, there's a difference between the most valuable and the most important, right? One of the most important cases I ever did was the recovery of a U.S. battle flag. It was a battle flag that was carried in the Civil War. It was carried at the Battle of Port Hudson, and it represented the 12th Regiment Corps d'Afrique. In other words, one of the first of 18 regiments of only 500 men. Back then it was 1,000, but this was a black regiment of African Americans. And as a result of being a black regiment, they only had 500 because they didn't believe that they could organize 1,000, black Americans at that time to be in a regiment. So this was the 12th Regiment Corps d'Afrique. It was carried in battle. 5 regimental standard bearers were shot out from under the flag. And it was stolen in the 1980s en route to a fort in South Carolina from a fort in Washington, D.C. So en route, it was taken. We got wind of it, and I did it undercover, saying I was going to buy it and sell it to a collector in London. It was only valued at about $30,000 at the time, and recovering was important. But the thing is, what it represented, was the first time in U.S. history. This is early on, when Black Americans could fight for their future and fight for the freedom of themselves and all of their children from there on out. And that was it just represented so much more than the $30,000. So the value wasn't as high, but as far as the price, but the value of the history and the culture was way up there. And then juxtapose that another case I did involving a original copy that was stolen of the civil right. I mean, of the Bill of Rights. Right. Yeah, and that was taken in 1865 from the State House of Raleigh, North Carolina, when Sherman's troops were coming north after sacking Atlanta. They were coming back up the East Coast, and they stopped in Raleigh and took over the State House to have North Carolina surrender. So it's the end of the war. And one of the troopers went into the State House and basically stole the Bill of Rights. It was sent to North Carolina in 1789 by George Washington to be ratified. That's it was part of the Constitution.
Yeah.
So this soldier stole it. It took it back to Indiana. It stayed there until 2003 when we were able to recover it. When it was being offered for sale by one of the Antiques Roadshow appraisers, it was being offered for sale to the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia for $4 million. Now, we, North Carolina wanted their copy back. It belonged to the state. It belongs to the people. Couldn't be sold. You can't own that piece of property. It's stolen, to begin with. So we were able to do another undercover there, and we're able to recover that. And the value of that, as far as the price, has been estimated at $100 million. Because the only document in U.S. history that'd be worth more would be the Declaration of Independence. There's only one of those.
Yeah.
There were 13 copies of this Bill of
13
Rights.
copies and 13 copies of the Declaration as well. And they come up. There's 2, I think, missing still. One was found in the back of a print in the frame in the back. I don't know if you ever heard that. At the time, it sold for $2 million. One of the 13 copies. And I got to see it. I went to New York to see it. And yeah, I mean, handwritten copies of the Declaration.
Martin, that was the printed copy. It was found in
the printed copy.
Yeah,
that's right. That was the printed
right.
Broadside.
What happened was when the broadside, when they printed the Declaration of Independence after it was announced, and then put it out, for the 13 college people to read. What I'm talking about is the actual handwritten, black ball ink copy of the edition of the Bill of the Declaration of Independence. It's only one of those.
And that was almost forgotten when Washington was burning, and in the War of 1812. When that was, there's a story about everything was all the important papers were loaded up in the wagon and ready to go, and the guy that was in charge of it, all of a sudden he just noticed it at the last minute and cut it out of the frame, got it out of there.
Yeah,
but I mean, pretty amazing.
Yeah, that was that was actually a painting of George Washington.
Oh, do I have that mixed up?
Yeah, that was in the White House, and Dolly Madison was there. And
are you sure about the Declaration? I'm going to do some research because I read about it was claiming the Declaration was in a black frame and almost forgotten. But I mean,
the George Washington painting was in the White House. It was hanging, and as the British came in, Dolly Madison is credited with having saved that painting, pulling it out. It was one of the Peel paintings, pulling it out and having it, taken away safely. But the truth is, it was a slave, Dolly Madison's slave, that actually saved the painting. She always got the credit for it, but it wasn't her. It was her slave that did it. So it's a different story.
Yeah. It's so hard to know the true things as they get passed along. So as far as museum, I mean, I would assume that the most of art theft is like from privates and, private homes, private people, private collections, things like that. But there are a lot of, that you have dealt with museums. And, I can't help but ask if you happen to know if there's anything new when it comes to the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum, the heist of 1990.
Yeah, that's a really interesting case, isn't it? These things have been missing, 34 years, and not one of the 13 pieces that were taken has ever been recovered. And that's in spite of the fact that there was a $5 million reward for information leading to the recovery, and now it's $10 million. So the fact that that kind of money has not brought out any good leads that have helped us to recover those paintings and objects of art. For your audience, there might be some people out there who don't know what happened. You want me to?
Would you? Yes.
Yeah, so sure. In 1990, on St. Patrick's Day night, 2 individuals dressed as Boston police officers went to the museum, Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum, and they told the guards that they had an arrest warrant for one of them, and they needed to interview him. So the guards let them in, which was against all the rules, but there was 2 guards there. So the 2 police officers went in. Of course, they weren't cops. They were thieves. They tied the guards up to pipes in the basement, and they went around the museum for the next hour and a few minutes, and they stole 13 objects of art. 2 of the pieces were just priceless. One is a Vermeer known as the Concert. It's the only Vermeer missing in the world. And the other was a Rembrandt seascape called the Storm over the Sea of Galilee. And that's the only seascape Rembrandt ever did. And so as a result, the heist that night was valued at $300 million. Today, those paintings are worth about $500 million if they're in good shape, which makes this is interesting, Martin. It makes that the single biggest property crime in U.S. history. I mean, think about it. The single biggest property crime in U.S. history is an art heist from a museum. Now, we're not talking about like Madoff crimes, like frauds. This is a property crime where one time people stole stuff, and it's $500 million worth. So it's the biggest in history, and none of it's ever been recovered.
It's crazy. And if you go in, you see the frames. I was there, months ago, and the frames are just sitting there empty, and it's haunting, to look at them. And then there was something like an eagle staff or something didn't even make sense of things that they took.
Yeah, one of the pieces that was stolen. Well, when your viewers read Priceless, they'll see from 2005 to 2008. I chronicle it in the book. I was undercover, working in Miami with informants and with criminals and who were from France. And in that case, we went from Miami to Barcelona to Paris to Marseille, chasing the Rembrandt and the Vermeer. They supposedly had information about both of those. They knew where they were at. They wanted 30 million for them. I was undercover as basically a shady dealer who was going to raise the 30 million to buy the pieces. And we ended up recovering 2 Picassos that were stolen from Diana Picasso, the granddaughter, in Paris.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
As well as 4 paintings that were stolen at gunpoint from the Museum of Fine Arts in Nice, 2 Bruegels, a Sicily, and a Monet. And after that, we were supposed to be able to do the Rembrandt and the Vermeer. The French police wanted us to do those cases first because the Monet and the Sicily were owned by the Musée d'Orsay, which is, of course, the National Gallery of France. So when those paintings went missing, it was a big push to get those back by the French police. And of course, Picasso's granddaughter, Diana, lives in Paris. So they were still, these 2 Picassos were valued at 60 million. They were stolen from her apartment. So they wanted to get those back. So the problem was that when they finally did the Nice case, one of the policemen told the bad guys that I was an FBI agent. And that kind of blew our chances to get the Vermeer and the Rembrandt. But here's the thing. You mentioned the eagle. Now, when we were doing that case, the people who had the paintings were supposed to be in Corsica. They're supposed to be Corsican mobsters. Okay. Corsica is an island off the coast of France, in between Italy and France. And over the years, it's been owned by both countries, but it's a very closed system. And so these were supposedly Corsican mobsters that had those paintings. Now, one of the pieces that was stolen in the robbery was a Corsican eagle. So there's 2 flags at the museum of the 1st Regiment Napoleonic Guards. Of course, Napoleon was from Corsica. And when he was exiled, that's where he went back. And his 1st regiment was his actual guard regiment that protected him. So they had these 2 flags from the 1st Regiment of Corsican Guards at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And on top of those flags are finials. And each of the finials is the Corsican eagle. So during the robbery in 1990, the thieves stole, along with the paintings, one of those finials, the Corsican eagle. Okay. And so
that's a good clue right there.
When you come back and look at the case that I was working on, and they told me these 2 paintings were in Corsica, it kind of comes together and makes sense. So your viewers have to read Priceless, and you'll see all the ins and outs on that if they're interested in the Gardner theft.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so if you did not have to chase that other art, most likely you would have recovered those amazing pieces. Amazing.
We were close. I thought we were close. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the French police did too. I mean, I was working with a colonel at the gendarmerie at the time, and he still says that we're right there. It's just that there's a lot of ins and outs of international policing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure you have to do all the protocols right. Could you have actually made a mistake that would, somehow forfeit the work? Is there something you have to do everything exactly by the book, I imagine?
Yeah, well, you have to follow the laws of the country that you're in. That's kind of how it works. I mean, I did a case in Madrid, in Spain, where after we recovered about $65 million worth of art, I actually had to go before a magistrate in Spain to be let go because I was committing a crime. I was buying stolen property, and I'm not a Spanish policeman, right? Yeah. So as a result, the Spanish police and the prosecutors had to go tell the judge that, I was working with them as an FBI agent, and therefore, I wasn't a culprit. Same thing happened to me in Denmark on a Rembrandt that we recovered. I was working undercover and I had to go before a judge. In Peru, in Lima, did the same thing. So depends on what country you're in, what you have to go through.
Yeah. Now, when you're, you probably, I don't think everyone would consider it secrets or whatever, but how, when something happens, like something gets stolen, you mentioned earlier that you were in touch with a bunch of basically criminals that were in Miami, from France or whatever. Is that the first go-to place because the word's out in between, the basically mob or criminals, or how do you approach something?
The first go-to place is to go to the site of the theft. I mean, that's where you go first. Ultimately, over time, artwork travels. It's property. Whether it's a Chevrolet or a Monet, it's going to travel. And if you don't get it back early on, it's going to go somewhere, and then people are going to try to sell it. And we usually recover things when they start to come back to market, whether it's being sold undercover to a policeman, or if it's being sold at auction by people who inherit things, or even who go out and buy things and don't realize they're stolen and then try to sell them again. That's when we recover them, because we find out at that point that they're being offered. So it's always when it comes back to market.
How can someone protect themselves? I know provenance is really key, but I mean, if you're like, you think you're buying from a reputable dealer, or you go into a shop and you buy a painting and it ends up being stolen, you put it in an auction, you didn't know, all of a sudden you're out the money, it's gone. And then they check, where did you get it? And where did they'll go back in the chain. And does the person that sold it, I mean, are they liable to pay their client, the one that lost?
Yeah. Well, what a person should do, if they're going to buy art, you should make sure you buy from a reputable dealer who's going to be there. Otherwise, he's going to be there in the next 2 years when you try to do something with the art. Basically, stolen art ends up playing like musical chairs with people. The last one holding it is the one who doesn't have a chair. So at that point, he loses the art. He's got to go back and try to, rewind his transaction. And if the person he's going to rewind with isn't there anymore, or is a shady person, he's stuck. So you have to do your due diligence. It's really important today, before you spend a lot of money on a piece of art. And this is something I do in my company. We do due diligence, provenance research to authenticate the provenances that are given on pieces of art. In other words, if somebody says to you, well, this was owned by my grandmother, we're going to go talk to her family and find out if her grandmother actually owned this piece, and how far back did they know that the grandmother had it, when we're talking about valuable pieces. Because you don't want a piece of artwork that has a blank in the provenance from the 1930s from Europe. It could be Nazi stolen art. You don't want a piece of art that there's no provenance on, because it could be stolen from a museum. And in the United States, if something is stolen from a museum, it has to go back. There's a new statute as a result of the Isabella Stewart Gardner theft that makes it a federal crime to steal an object of cultural heritage from a museum. And possession of that is an ongoing crime. So there's no statute of limitations basically on the possession aspect of it, which is new. It's a different thing. So people have to realize, just to give you an example, there was a Renoir, a small Renoir, a $50,000 piece, was stolen from the Baltimore Museum of Art in 1950. And so a family actually bought this little piece at a flea market, and they went to sell it at an auction house, and then it became known. Of course, the insurance company owned it because they had paid off to the Baltimore Museum of Art, but it went back. So they didn't have a lot of money invested in it because they bought it cheaply at a flea market, but they thought they had a good windfall. And as it turns out, they had nothing, because, it was stolen property. So you have to do your due diligence and make sure you're not offering something for sale that's illegal, or, that has bad provenance, that has been, stolen from somewhere else.
So there's a quick, I'll try to make it quick. There's a story because it's someone that I knew that bought a box full of, paintings and everything at this beautiful mansion. And it was an early 1800s mansion, brick mansion. And I know the house, and there was some really nice artwork in the house. So they bought a whole box. The woman was selling things out of the attic. Why it was in the attic, I don't know. But he pulls it out and he looks, and it's a panel, and it's signed Homer. So he takes it, and he does all the work on it. And I guess enough people believed in it, but he had to bring it to Lloyd Goodrich or whatever, and he passed away. So it was Abigail Gertz Booth. That was the woman's name in Washington, George Washington University. So we went there, I guess, without an appointment, and tried to get her to look at it. And she like yelled and said, do what everyone else does, send a transparency. And so anyway, bottom line is she called him up and she said, where did this piece come from? And he said, well, actually, it came from a yard sale. And she basically hung up on him. She said, no Winslow Homer comes out of a yard sale. I mean, it's just showing you how important it is to have. I mean, he may have well been holding a Homer in his hand.
Yeah.
But when it doesn't have.
That's the problem today in the art world. I mean, the authentication committees don't exist anymore. The Warhol committee's out of business. The Basquiat committee quit doing it because they were getting sued so many times. They look at a piece and they say they didn't think it was real, didn't think it was right. Of course, once they do that, that destroys the value of the object, and they were getting sued. And so people were contesting their announcements. So most of them are pretty much out of business. Today's world, if you're going to be an art collector, you should buy something that's in the catalog raisonné. If somebody comes to you with a new Basquiat that nobody's ever seen before, that Basquiat had hidden in the behind the radiator in his basement, don't believe it. I mean, it's just it doesn't matter if it's real or not. It's not going to be accepted. Okay, I had a painting come to me from a person. It was a Cezanne, signed Cezanne. It was in the family. There was a history of it. There was a signed bill of sale from a gallery. Okay, it was on a street in Marseille in 1918. So this gallery on this street in Marseille sold this painting to this relative who was I think he was a duke or something in France, and we had all the documentation. And it was a very nice little, genre piece. I think it was some tomatoes and a cantaloupe or something, on the table. Looked just like a Cezanne. It actually had forensic work done on it, and we found yellow pigment in the paint that was banned by the Indian government in 1899 that Cezanne did use. But it was banned because it came from the urine of sacred cows. So the Indian government didn't allow it to be created anymore. But Cezanne still had some in 1918 or 1917, whenever it was. So, it's pretty good provenance. I mean, it's good forensics. It's good history. We got the bill of sale. But, they paid 1,000 francs for it at that time in 1918, 1970. So, all of it came together, but it wasn't authenticated because the authentication people who looked at it said, no, it doesn't look right to us. We don't like the strokes. So that's the end of that. I mean, it's a shame, but that's the way it works.
Fall off the easel and they could still kill it.
They could still kill it. And it happens all the time. I had another case involving a Jackson Pollock. It was owned by the girlfriend of Jackson Pollock, not the wife, not Lee, but it's his girlfriend who was with him the night he had the car accident. And she said this was the last painting. He gave it to her. He did it for her. So in the 1980s, she went to sell it. Well, they couldn't authenticate it. So what they did forensically, we had a forensic investigator. He was at the NYPD, and he worked at John Jay College. So he looked at it, and we found microscopic polar bear hairs in the paint. Polar bear hairs, right? So we went back to the house, and of course, in his bedroom is a polar bear rug. The DNA on the polar bear hairs matched the rug.
Oh my God.
But the Jackson Pollock committee said, yeah, that might have meant that it was in the house. Doesn't mean he did it. So the value goes away. Once again, I mean, nobody's going to pay $20 million for that. You see?
Yeah.
So,
and Jackson Pollocks, unfortunately, are one of the ones that are faked so often, because of the type of paint he used and all that,
And it all still exists. The paint can be gotten today. It's still out there. And, there's, I hate to tell you, I did another case involving an attorney who had 30 Pollock paintings he had bought online, 30. And he wanted to get them authenticated. He's, because if these were real, it's probably $1 billion, worth of art. Yeah. So he told me where he bought them. He bought them online out of a gallery in Miami, and actually Fort Lauderdale. So I went to Fort Lauderdale to find this gallery, and it turned out to be a flea market. It was a flea market in Fort Lauderdale, and it came out of the Harley Davidson shop. Okay, there was a lady in there who sold these paintings, and I said, "What's going on with this?" Well, she said, "We don't sell fakes. they come from China, and everybody in Florida wants a real Jackson Pollock. So we sell them for about $1,000 to $1,500 a piece, and people can put them on their wall. They say they got a Jackson Pollock. And you know what? There's nothing illegal about that. That's not being sold as a forgery or a fake. It's just a drip painting, and people want to believe that the Jackson Pollock. They're going to pay $1,000 for a $20 million painting. It's just what people want. So
now,
there's a lot out there.
Does it degrade? So does it degrade the original art in any type of way, or are the two separate things?
No, because everybody wants one so bad. There's not a legitimate Pollock in any museum in Florida. So, and they all would love to have one. So that the 110 or so that are authenticated that are out there, they keep their value. It's the problem with the new ones that people show up with, that, like one of the ones that was sold by Knoedler. They sold one for, I think, $6 million, and it was wrong. It wasn't real. So that's what happens,
Now, I went with a piece to the jury years ago. I'm going to say 25, 30 years ago for a Picasso. Someone had owed me some money, and they gave me a drawing, basically. The drawing was very graphic, that I would not hang in the house, and I had kids at the time. So I ended up just, trying to sell it. But I went to the jury, and they said that was something like the 41st drawing he did that day. That's how many. I mean, it was crazy when that came back with that. They knew the drawing. Yeah,
they knew it. Well, look at the. I have a couple of pieces, from the 347 series, and so if you think about that, he did 347 etchings over the course of about 9 months. Doing a few a day, and they were reproduced 50 times each. So that specific series has 18,000 pieces in it. That's why the biggest stolen art, the artist with the most stolen art in the world is Picasso, because he was so prolific with all of his prints and etchings and things.
Right. I'm seeing my screen frozen. Do you see?
Yeah, I see. You still look great.
Oh, good. Okay, I don't know what's going on, but you can still hear me and everything.
Yeah, I can hear you, but you're frozen.
Okay,
oh, you're back. Here you are. Yeah.
All right. So when something like, let me just see, I did have a question. Oh, yes. When something is stolen in a situation like, for instance, the Nazi, there was all that stolen art. How often are you aware of, do families actually get some of their artwork back repatriated to them?
Oh, quite often. I mean, stolen property is stolen property. Now, Nazi looted art, a little bit different. I mean, that comes under treaty obligations that were signed in 1946 after the Second World War. And those are all civil cases. They're not criminal cases. And oftentimes they have to go through civil court proceedings to be able to recover those pieces. I recently recovered a piece that was stolen in Hawaii. This was just last year. It was actually offered for sale. It was a $30,000 piece, not real expensive, but it was stolen in 1970. So it's been missing for 50 years. And it was interesting because the artwork itself was a painting of 5 children, and these children were it was for a dentist's office. It worked with kids, and the dentist had it hanging in the office to make the kids feel comfortable. And it was a very nice painting. Anyway, it was done by the woman who did the big eyes, the big eye paintings.
Yes. I've appraised one of those. Yeah, I know who you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very, she's become very famous. There was a movie about her a couple of years ago.
That's right.
And and so she had done the painting and back in 1970, and they had bought it, and it was hanging, it was stolen off the wall while everybody was out to lunch one day. So she calls me and she says, my father's painting has been sold. It was at Heritage. And so I said, well, how can you prove it's yours? So she sent me a newspaper article from 1970 in the Hawaii newspaper, in the Honolulu Times or whatever. But also what was interesting, the painting itself had a little girl in the middle of it, a 5-year-old girl. And it was her. She was the model for the painting. So she sent me a picture of herself when she was 5. And when you compare that with the paint, you couldn't miss it. It was her, And so that's why it was so important for her to get it back. Ultimately, Heritage did the right thing. They arranged for it to be recovered. They paid the money back to the buyer, and were able to give it back to the woman. And she's got it hanging in her home, today in Honolulu. Yeah, so the family was recovered. So there are good stories about recoveries for families. It's not always some lawyer making $100 million. Oftentimes it is a family that gets their stuff back. It means something to them.
That's right. That's what's really important. Margaret Keane, that's who that is.
That's it. That's who it is. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I appraised one of her paintings recently. It was like, whoa, they're selling for a lot of money. Yeah.
She was still alive at the time. She just died, what, 2 years ago? A year ago? She just passed away. But at the time when we were talking about this, she was still alive, and she actually remembered the painting. So that helped as well.
Now, a little off topic, maybe, I don't know, but what do you think about, it seems like there's a lot of activists, you see them like super gluing themselves to like a piece of art or trying to dump paint on it. I mean, I just can't understand their way of thinking. You and I have talked before about, once these things are destroyed, a lot of, obviously they're not destroyed, but they're protected mostly. Most of these things are protected.
Yeah, I don't think anything's been destroyed at this point. They all have usually clear glass or some kind of coating, and what they're doing is they're smearing the coating with the blood or the jelly or whatever it is. Acid, is it a good protest? I don't think so. I think that maybe the first time they did it once, people might have paid attention, but by the 100th time, everybody realizes that they're who they are, what they're doing. Do I disagree with them? No, there is a climate problem. Absolutely there is. And absolutely we need to address it. Does it help that they do that? Do I think that makes it more prevalent? No, the fact that it's 100 degrees out yesterday makes it very prevalent when it's 100 degrees in Philadelphia. Okay. So I don't think there's any question that we need to address that, but I don't think, smudging artwork makes a difference.
Right. What did you happen to see any changes when COVID happened and during that, and changes like prior to COVID and now as far as art and collecting or anything?
No, I think that I think during COVID, things went online very heavily. And I think that's changed auctions. I mean, the auction houses that survived basically started online auctions, online only.
Yep.
And that still exists today. I think it works out pretty well. I mean, if you think about it, you don't have to be there. You can buy things anywhere in the world, anywhere in the country, and you can bid on it and whatnot. And it's online. So, and much more so than it was before. In other words, they still did it before COVID, but now it's just commonplace. So I think that made it was a small change. I think a lot of probably galleries might have gone out of business that didn't have any more walk-in clientele. I think it really hurt the cruise ship gallery business because the cruise ships weren't running anymore. But that's back, I think, 100% as well. I think it came roaring back. When people were allowed to go out, I think it really helped the economy at that point. That's why we had this big boom in the economy, even in the art world. So, it went down, but it came back, and I think that's a good sign.
Well, I remember trying to think who it was. I interviewed during COVID when it first started, interviewed auctioneers around the country. And Wes, I'm trying to think of his name. He's in Ohio. Anyway, his comment was, collectors have to collect. They'll figure out a way. And I thought, wow, that was great wisdom, because they figured it out. Yeah.
Yes,
I got involved in some of those online things too, the Auction Ninja and all these different things, or things start out at $1 and then they end up, $6,000 or whatever for something. But it's a way to do it. It's a lot of work, but it's a way to at least get it sold.
Keep it going.
I like to touch, I like to actually see for myself that type of thing, but still.
Well, that's the danger of it, is that you don't get to actually touch and feel something, so you don't know. It could be fake, it could not be real, and you wouldn't know unless you actually were able to feel it, or even condition purpose. Take what you were talking about earlier, Maria Bowl. You wouldn't know if it was repaired unless you can run your fingers around the top of the bowl.
If it has a thunk, and
if it, you won't feel the tension or the ridges or something that show for the repair. Those are things that you have to touch to be able to do. So you get it, and you got a busted bowl that's been repaired, half-assed. And it's not a good thing, right?
Yeah, so we're right near the end here, but I want to ask you, because I know I asked you last time, because I think it's kind of a funny statement. Is a lot of people think of like a romantic, art theft or art thief, like Pierce Brosnan or someone like that, or like crawling down all these places and, with all the tech gear, and they're doing all this stuff to create this heist. How far? That's pretty far off. Yeah.
It's pretty far-fetched. Yeah. I mean, there's different classes or groups of criminals, and there's a hierarchy. The higher criminals are the ones who do the frauds and the forgeries. There's some pretty good artists out there who know how to fake art, and who can copy. And then you have the thieves. The common thieves are the ones who go out and do stealing. Basically, we used to look at it as a way into different gangs, because they're going to be doing many different types of crimes, and they just happen to do an art theft. So they're not just doing that; they're doing gun running, drug dealing, all that sort of thing. So that's a different thing. Now, what I do, just like let your viewers know, I'm going to be doing 2 separate courses this year. One in September, August, for IFAR, which is International Foundation of Art Research. You can go to their website and sign up. I'm going to be doing a 5-lecture course covering all different aspects of art crime. The first one is basically theft. The second one is the 3 F's of art crime: frauds, forgeries, and fakes. Then antiquities theft, then book and document theft, and then iconic art heists. And each of the cases basically feature all cases that I was in. In other words, these different topics are all about cases that I did. So you'll be hearing they'll be hearing the actual background stories, what really happened and what's not in the newspapers, that type of thing. And so we'll be doing that for them, and also for Christie's education in November. I'll be doing the same series. So if anybody's really interested in following up and getting into art crime for real, and learning about it but not committing it, they can sign up for one of the courses.
Yeah. I just want to tell you this one last story. Is I was when I had my auction company, I was all ready I had a pretty big auction, a nice auction, and this guy called me up. He says, "I'm from New York City and I'd like to bring up a painting to put in the auction." I said, "Well, it's already the auction's put to bed. It's cataloged out and whatever, But he said, no. I said, you're really going to want this painting. So I met him at like a rest area. He came up from New York, and he gets out of his car and he goes, "Oh, the air smells so good here." And it was like, all that. And I was a little worried. And then he opens the back, and I'm looking right down at a Georgia O'Keeffe, big flower. Turns it over, gallery labels, all, old gallery labels and new gallery. It was right as rain. And I said, "You're giving this to me to put in an auction unadvertised? Is that what I'm understanding here?" And he said, "Yeah, just run it through. It'll take care of itself." And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I mean, obviously he said, his parents owned this gallery for years, but you don't just, I mean, all the red flags went up, and I had the sense it was only in my 30s, but I had the sense to walk away from it.
Did you walk away? What'd you do? Tell him to go back to New York?
Yeah. Well, I told him, I said, the only way I'll take this is if I know the provenance and I can advertise it well and ahead. Right. I mean, I still had no business selling a painting like that, but still, I would have gladly have had it.
Oh yeah. Well, did he ever come back?
No, I never heard from him again. Yeah.
We found that it's easier to fake the gallery labels.
It probably was. Yeah, could have been. Yeah.
That's something that, good fakers know. You don't really have to have a great painting. You can just have good gallery labels and put them on the back. And it makes it look right.
Something I never thought of. I never thought of.
We used to see those a lot, especially coming out of Eastern Europe, from Turkey. It would get smuggled through Turkey to Germany, and you'd have all these great gallery labels on it, and it would be all it would look old, and have all that with it, but it's just fake.
Wow. Well, I always say when it comes to artwork, it's guilty till proven innocent.
There you go.
It really has to be.
You're right.
Yeah. Well, another very pleasant conversation. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
Marty.
And the book is Priceless. It's out there. You can get it on Amazon. And again, I really appreciate all that you've done, and we've been in touch off and on over the years. And I'll be in touch with you again about a situation. So anyway, thank you very much.
Let's do it again in 10 years.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Optimistic. Thanks, buddy. Take care.
Yeah. Bye.